So, what are the Czech and Slovak governments up to again? The government has approved a memorandum on deeper cooperation between the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So, why should the Czech Republic have anything to do with Slovakia? And let's remove the sentiment from the past now. Czechia, Slovakia, shared superstars and all those things. Let's say this is a cynical geopolitical game and ask what we get out of it. What does cooperation with Slovakia bring us? Why not cooperate more, for example, with Poland, which is a much more promising market? Their economy is growing 5 times faster than the Slovak economy. They are developing, they want to build nuclear power plants, they want to train workers in nuclear power plants, and theoretically, the Czech Republic could help with that. There is the E6 project, which the Czech Republic would definitely like to be part of as well, so that it could be expanded to E7. Or the B9 project, which could be a significantly better project, a less Hungarian project, than the half-dead V4, where one of the ministers is passing information to Russia about what's happening inside, and another goes to Moscow and Beijing just to make up the numbers in the ninth. One could almost say that our cooperation with Slovakia has little to offer. And of course, it's true that the prospect of greater, let's say, prestige would certainly come from cooperation with Poland. And it already has. And I am a huge proponent of the Czech Republic focusing less on Slovakia, although I wouldn't completely reject it, and focusing more on Poland, and on Northern Europe, the Baltics, Scandinavia, and of course to continue focusing on Germany, but there's really no other way to do that. This is the future. That's where we should be looking more. However, it needs to be said that those opinions like Slovakia is completely useless and we should just throw Slovakia away. And what good is Slovakia to us? To taktéž není úplně pravda. I've heard a few political commentators who couldn't find any reason why anything should be done with Slovakia, why there's anything there at all, that it's a country in decline, that they're the worst at everything, absolutely everything, which in a way, there's some truth to that, though they're not the absolute worst. There are worse countries like Bulgaria, for example, but yes, clearly Slovaks are at the tail end of the European Union, that's true. But that doesn't mean they have nothing to offer the Czech Republic from a cynical, geopolitical, and unsentimental point of view. So let's take a look at what Slovaks, Slovakia, and cooperation with Slovakia can actually bring us, besides the occasional law from there aimed at cracking down on NGOs and some stupid idea that our politicians should talk about protests as if they were a Georgian coup. What else comes to us? Or what can this cooperation really bring us? And no, it's not just a joint cooking show on Czech television. A major benefit could be economic cooperation in electromobility, for example, because a huge gigafactory for batteries has started construction in Slovakia, and for instance, Kia has begun expanding electric vehicle production in Žilina. In addition, a new Volvo factory is also being built in Slovakia, and overall, at this moment, a huge amount of components for car production are flowing from the Czech Republic to the Slovak Republic. If all of this succeeds, then the Czech Republic and Slovakia could become a very powerful and very successful economic electromobility hub, which would have a certain perspective because, of course, electromobility is gaining popularity. It will continue to gain popularity. It's something that is also being pushed by Europe. It's a global trend. So this is something that could ultimately pay off quite well if Czechs and Slovaks cooperate. It's also good that between Czechs and Slovaks, between the Czech Republic and Slovakia, there is a relatively low bureaucratic barrier. And even though the Poles, of course, have their own car factories and their own tendencies to produce electric batteries and these things, it's not as easy to break through there and to cooperate as it is with the Slovaks. Of course, it's definitely appropriate for us to try to connect our economy with Poland as well. I'm just saying that right now the Slovak and Czech economies are already connected in the automotive industry. Really, 50% of the components for car production in Slovakia come from the Czech Republic. So there is something to build on. These ties have already been established, and this could be something that helps. True, it will mainly help Slovakia, but it can definitely bring at least something to the Czech Republic as well. So yes, this is one of those things. Maybe the biggest opponents of electric cars like Czechs and Slovaks will eventually become the place where it all gets made. Who could have expected this? It's almost an ironic development. Another reason why the connection between government negotiations and the closer relationship between Czechia and Slovakia could be something more than just the Hungarianization of our countries, as guys like Petros and Bohumil from Czechia Politika sometimes say, is, for example, energy cooperation. Because it seems that the Slovaks will soon start building a nuclear power plant. It will be built by Westinghouse, meaning the Americans, and there are various projects here that should further connect the Czech and Slovak energy networks. Right now we have a bit of a problem because neither nuclear nor renewable sources are really being built here. And everything is just kind of in the preparation stage. And frankly, we're just kind of treading water. The Slovaks, even though they have the government they do, and even though their economic growth is totally screwed, and even though things are generally bad there, and they have bad ratings, bad evaluations, and they're in a bad situation, when it comes to energy, at least they're doing something. Yeah, of course, they weren't exactly far-sighted in diversifying their sources. They weren't exactly far-sighted in their partnerships. Now we're going to have to help them, all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. Their government is basically a bunch of idiots, yeah? But when it comes to energy cooperation, that's something that could benefit the Czech Republic, could provide greater energy stability, cheaper electricity, and of course, cooperation between our nuclear power plants can generally increase the qualifications of our workers in nuclear power plants. Plus, of course, once we finally start building something here, and once things really get going, there could be some benefits in terms of consulting, additional, let's say, support staff, and so on. In short, there is some potential here that, for example, doesn't really exist in Poland, because even though Poland is also considering nuclear power plants now, for the time being, they're just thinking about it. Sure, we have the liquefied natural gas terminal there, which we can draw something from. And there, we would need to push harder with the Poles, so that we are more connected, so that there is more cooperation, so we can take advantage of the growing Polish potential. And the fact that we're dealing with an emerging regional power, that's clear. Really, cutting ourselves off from the Poles would be stupid. But the Slovaks aren't completely useless in energy either. Another thing is the Visegrad 4. At this moment, the project is on the verge of collapse. In a vegetative state, you could say, just before being unplugged. But some levels can still theoretically function, like the V4 battle group, that is, cooperation, close cooperation between the armies of the Visegrad 4. Personally, I'm a much bigger fan of B9, I think you all know that. V4 seems too Hungarian to me. And overall, I would kick the Hungarians out of everything, because they're a bunch of fascists. But as for the future of Hungary, theoretically after Orban leaves, after de-Urbanization and de-Hungarianization, when a Hungarian comes in to make his own version of an authoritarian state, in other words, an authoritarian state, but more aligned with Brussels than with Moscow, then theoretically it could somehow be restored again. In Slovakia, of course, the government will be all sorts of things, but maybe with a change in Hungary, the approach in Slovakia will also change a bit. We, as the Czech Republic, are neither fish nor fowl, so I would say that we will adapt, that we are still quite flexible for now. So let's say that at least on some levels it would be possible to revive the Visegrad 4. And it could get rid of that aftertaste that it's just a group of countries that has everything here. It tends to break up the European Union or something similar. Simply put, it's good. The V4 is a project that's on the verge of dying, but I wouldn't completely throw it away yet, at least in some respects. Not necessarily in full-fledged functioning, but at least in military cooperation, procurement, and so on. I would still give it a chance. In any case, it's necessary to say here as well that greater cooperation with the Poles, the Baltics, the Nordic countries, Germany, and so on would definitely be appropriate. And I definitely wouldn't limit these special relationships only to the Slovaks. I would definitely try to establish at least similar relationships with the Poles. So that simply Czechs, Slovaks, and Poles would have similar relationships, similar connections, similar opportunities in the market, and similar cooperation. So that Polish students here would have studies as easy as Slovaks do when they want to study. So that everything would be ready for both of these countries because both of them have a lot to offer. They have a lot to provide. And it would be a shame to focus only on Slovakia. However, I said one thing here that I stand by, that the Slovak government is a bunch of idiots. That's regardless. Regardless of any opinion, they're a bunch of idiots. Slovakia is declining. Nobody really wants to live there. That's another thing, and this is the cynical part of this video, where we can actually make quite a profit if we have this close cooperation here and so on, and we present ourselves as a better alternative for living, then young Slovaks will come to us instead of staying in Slovakia, and they will contribute to our economic growth. That's something that's good when it comes to cooperation between the Czech and Slovak republics. And that's something, by the way, that should also be developed between Czechia and Poland. So the Poles would come to us more often. So if I put it this way, when law and justice prevail there again, and they order women to cover their heads with scarves, because that's what women used to do in the Christian world in the Middle Ages, then we would gladly welcome those young Polish women in Czechia. If I simplify it like this and make it a bit grotesque, but you understand what I'm trying to say, the Czech Republic, out of this V4 area, let's leave the Hungarians aside, they're kind of isolated. That's Hungary. They have a strange culture, completely incompatible with us. They have a strange language. They'll never learn Czech, and so on. But the Poles, both men and women, could be a certain benefit, and we should be, out of those three countries, the one that offers refuge the most to free-thinking people and to those who want to create something, who don't want to be bound by old irrational customs that only slow down growth and development. Simply put, whenever some religious fanatic in Poland gets some crazy ideas, or whenever some pro-Russian idiot in Slovakia gets some crazy ideas, here in Czechia, we should be secular and pro-Western, and of course generally reasonable, and offer refuge to people fleeing from those countries where things aren't going the way a pro-Western secular person would wish. We should offer them shelter so they can come here, increase our gross domestic product, and help pay for our pensions. That's the plan. That's it. These are the reasons why we should cooperate not only with Slovakia, but also with Poland. And these are the reasons why cooperation between Slovakia and the Czech Republic isn't just necessarily about us wanting to learn from the Slovaks, or our government wanting to learn from the Slovaks how to run the Czech state television. There are more aspects that can play a role, and it's stupid to simplify it to us just learning from them how to strangle a democratic state. Yeah? If we keep simplifying it like this, we'll look like idiots. So that's that. The Lucas Fourth. Hey there!